Hi pals, it's me, Artie, then in pronouns only, and unfortunately I'm coming to you with a not good experience of the medical field. So yeah, I've mentioned a few times I was getting an MRA to check on the state of my takayasus at the moment, and because I have dodgy veins, they prepared it so that I would get a midline inserted beforehand instead of traditional cannulation, all done by like a specialist team before I would then actually go and get the MRA technically done. So yeah, unfortunately I didn't have a great time. At first, obviously I've got a bit of a way to travel. I've got to come all the way from Sussex to pretty central London, which can be overwhelming in itself, just all the travel, trying to make sure you get there on time. Luckily we were there quite early, so we did sit for a bit to sort of just like breathe, chill out, have some lunch and stuff, because I'm still really struggling with a lot of sort of nausea, and that's especially worsened when I am more anxious and have to kind of prepare myself for leaving the house for long periods of time, even if I'm going with somebody else. Actually, before that, we were trying to find the right location. This is only our second time at this hospital ever. We've only been to one particular part of it, which was the rheumatology area, I guess. Like, it's where they do the vascular clinics. So we didn't know where we were going. We couldn't see a map anywhere. So we followed some signs and we ended up at sort of the renal IV unit. So we asked someone there where we should be going, and they were like, oh yes, this is the renal building. If you just go around there in the lift and up to the level that you're talking about, it'll be right there. We did that and got there, and we were like, we don't see the name of this unit anywhere. Luckily, a member of staff saw us looking around and asked us if we were okay, offered to help us. She basically said we were given the complete wrong information. And we were like, oh yeah, someone at the front desk of the renal IV sort of clinic told us this was the renal building. And she was like, no, no, that's at the other end of the hospital. So she took us most of the way. The rest of it we could find ourselves because she pointed us where to go. So yeah, that's when we then took our break, is when we got up to the right level of that building. It was warm because everywhere else was so fucking cold that day. This was like a couple of days after the sort of first snow in sort of the southern part of the UK. So a lot of the temperatures were around freezing. It was really cold. Yeah, because this floor was warm as well, we sort of like decided to thaw out a bit, eat some food. There weren't many people around as well, so I felt a little bit okay with taking my mask off. Had some drinks, finished off my rehydration salt drink as well, and then we decided to go in. They gave me a bed, which I was quite anxious about. I was like, why do I need a bed? What's a bed for? Most of the staff there were very nice. There was a little bit of friction between me and one member of staff because I was told that my midline would be inserted at 2 o'clock to be ready for my scan at 3:15. And obviously I didn't really know how long it would take to insert it, and I was a bit worried that this person wasn't here yet, because I don't think he always works there. I think he's someone who works around the hospital doing this. Like, he's a specialist person who is trained in inserting midlines. So maybe he's an IV nurse. I'm not really sure. Nobody really specified who he was. I thought, based on the information I was given before this actual appointment happening, was that it would all be done in this building for a particular reason. Like, I thought that he would already be working there, you know, like based there. So I was sort of saying to her, I was like, if I don't get to the MRI unit in time, they said that they won't do the scan, and I don't really live locally. I can't just pop back in tomorrow or whatever to get the scan done. And she was like, well, we can't do anything. I can't do that. And I was like, I know, like, I'm not asking or expecting you to do something that you can't or shouldn't be doing, but I need to have this scan, and if he doesn't turn up in time to get everything done that he's doing so that I can get there in time, then I can't get that scan. She was just sort of like, oh, we can't do anything. So my mum was then like, oh, could you ring them again maybe and see like how long they are gonna be? So they did do that. I had already taken my diazepam and was already like away. I was not in, babes. He roughly turned up at about 2:30. Most of the time it takes is actually just setting up to prepare for it, because it's a bit more intense than a typical cannula. I did have some very useful sources on the process in my MRI tips video that I posted just before the new year. But yeah, basically from my own personal experience, they obviously have a lot of stuff in those bags, like the kit bags that keep everything sterile. He had to put on a thing. Oh my god, what are they called? Not a bib. Not a gown either, but yeah, one of those. He had to put on a mask, he had to put on like a face shield and a little hairnet too, and obviously gloves. Duh. They had to be really thorough with cleaning the area of my arm that they used. They put a sheet over me as well. It was basically like a mini surgery in a lot of ways. And I now at that point realised why they were using a bed. Basically, it's better off positioning wise, particularly. I got asked a few questions, I always tend to do that, and he was answering them. But basically they tend to go with veins in the sort of upper part of your arm for midlines, because they are bigger and more reliable than the smaller ones further down your arm. Midlines as well, there's a few different versions of these kinds of things. Obviously there's a cannula which has no catheter attached. There's like a next step that's not always necessarily a thing everywhere. I think it's being used a bit more in America, which is like a mini midline is what it's called. A midline has a catheter of about, I think, 15 to 20 centimeters long, and then a PICC line is above 20 centimeters because it will go more directly into sort of your heart. So mine was the middle sort of one, because they want it to kind of reach somewhere around here. A lot of people get them for cancer treatment, for example, to protect their veins. Yeah, they were very thorough with it all. Obviously I was laying down, it's easier for the positioning because then you can sort of hold your arm outwards and they can find one sort of on the inner part of your arm. And also with the positioning, I couldn't actually see anything at all because my chest was in the way, so that was good for me. I was looking at different bits and pieces, but yeah, I obviously didn't want to look at it happening. I can't look at it when blood tests and cannulas are being done to me either. Yeah, it was all done. They used a big part of the midline is they use ultrasound to find the vein and help actually use it for guiding as well. They use it even when they are trying to get the needle down, because it's usually deeper veins there as well. Once they found a vein they wanted to use, that's when they used the anaesthetic injection. They said as well they could give top-ups as well if it either continued to hurt or was still hurting or whatever. Honestly, that was the worst bit. The worst bit was that injection, because that was a bit that was painful. But after that, I did get a little bit of pain, so they did top me up again with some more of it as they were trying to actually access the vein they were looking for. But as things go with me, they were struggling to actually reach and access the vein because my veins are so deep. They were making that comment. I was like, oh yeah, that's what everybody says about all of my veins they try to get, is they're just so deep. So even with an ultrasound, they were still struggling to actually find and access the vein itself. But they did do it. It was okay. They put the catheter in. Didn't really feel a lot of any of that either. I do tend to feel the flushes when they do like flushes of saline and stuff like that. I don't know what it is. I get this strange feeling in the back of my throat. Sometimes I get the sort of sea salty taste, but not always. On this day I was mostly feeling that funny sensation in my throat. And yeah, so they also I mentioned that I have allergies to adhesives, so they did also put down like a barrier cream thing before putting all of the actual sticky stuff down to keep everything in place. And yeah, it was pretty much okay. For a while it was fine. It was more when the anaesthetic injection was then wearing off, and as well as my diazepam wearing off. But it did take a little bit longer than they expected. So I was like really, really close on time. They also had to ring and say that I was on the way and checking where they were, like the x-ray were for me, because we were like, I don't know where it is. We couldn't find a map. They showed us the map, showed us where to go. So we still struggled. We had to stop at the reception on the way, and they pointed us the rest of the way, and we found it. It was kind of one of those weird, like, mini portable hut unit things as well. It was very, very small everywhere. Like, it was a weird hybrid / between version of just those, the ones on the trucks where there is no waiting room, that you basically are one patient at a time in the actual truck. Because I've had one of those before back, God, in 2018, 19 maybe. Yeah, it was sort of like an in-between of that and like an actual in-building unit. It was kind of like those weird old huts that they would build in schools temporarily but then never get rid of. So yeah, the front room was a very small waiting room, but nobody was there. It was just me and my mum and then staff. We turned up, said who we were. They gave us a thing to fill in. I'd literally just written my name by the time people had come around to start asking me questions. They asked if I'd been cannulated, and we were like, no, I was given a midline. That was something that we'd prearranged because I have really difficult veins. And the initial man who was talking to us, who was really nice, he was he said he was an agency worker, so he's not permanently based there. And he was like, oh yeah, I don't think we use midlines here. We don't use midlines for this sort of thing. And I was like, oh, well, my team here said that they do this all the time for people with difficult veins. And this was probably the worst thing he said out of the whole time he was around. But he was like, that's a lie. I was like, later on, I was like, how could you say that when you're an agency worker? If you're not here all the time, how do you know that? And yeah, they were sort of like erring and ahhing for a little while, and I was like, look, if you're gonna say that I can't get this done, I will have a breakdown. Because this is one of the biggest issues I have with a lot of my healthcare, is that I'm complicated and not very easy to like access or do any of these things with. They did ask as well, would I be okay with them trying to access me for a cannula, and I went, no. Like, that's why we set all this up beforehand, was to avoid me having to be forced to be cannulated by someone who's not actually very good at cannulating. And then yeah, one of the other staff members, who is a reoccurring character in this story, well, basically just walked past and went, yeah, we can't use that, because they were sort of looking at it. And the people that put it in were basically like, yeah, this is basically a cannula, just deeper and a little bit bigger with the thing. The staff at the MRI unit kept calling it a PICC line, even though I kept repeating myself, it's a midline. There is a difference, as I've already said here, but you can also find that information on Google. It is not the same. So I was getting frustrated as well with like, it seems like people aren't listening to what I'm saying, and I was like, look, after she said, no, we can't use it, I broke down. I had a massive breakdown. I was like wailing, crying. I haven't had a breakdown like that in a while. Like, I really would have compared myself to a banshee or something. I was wailing because we'd done all this preparation to try and make this as easy as possible. And they were just like, no, we can't use that. And I've just gone through all this stuff with the midline for no reason, ? So because I was wailing, they were then keen to get me in the back because I was causing a scene, even though no one was there. There was no one there to witness this scene. It was still just me and my mum at that point and just all the staff. But we did go back there, and they sat me in the cannula chair, and I was just like, I really was just like, you're not cannulating me. So the agency person came up to us and said, like, look, I have to go now for a little while because it's my break time, and it's not because I don't care about you as a patient or anything like that. I'm an agency and it's time for my break, so I have to go on break. And we were like, no, that's fine, don't worry about it. And he was always pretty nice to us during that process, so it is a bit of a shame he wasn't around, unfortunately, for that bit, and had to go take his break. I wonder if it might have been better if he had been around and I could have said, hey, I only want him near me, thanks. But they were ringing people round. They were basically as well said like, oh, because your doctors aren't at this hospital, blah blah blah. And I was like, they are. Why would I be referred here for a scan that I can get literally at any hospital? This is like not a difficult or unique scan to get. I've had this scan before at my local hospital's MRI unit. Why would I be referred here from Sussex? But it just, this one particular staff member just did not seem to give a shit about anything that I was actually saying. And that was one of the main issues with this whole experience, was just like, she was complaining about things to do with me, but then was not interested in actually listening to me explain it. I'd even shown the agency guy the email I'd been sent from the rheumatology secretary, which also had my rheumatologist's name in the email, and it also said midline, and he was like, yeah, oh yeah, it does say midline. And I was like, a lot of this is really discombobulated because I was in such a state, and even though I've literally written it all out as clear as possible in chronological order as much as possible to a friend of mine, it's still very jumbled in my brain. Where was I with that? Yeah, so like this one particular staff member that I really did not enjoy. I didn't like any of the others really, only the agency guy was nice enough, but the rest of them were terrible, but she was especially bad. Was that, yeah, her just saying that my doctors weren't from this hospital, and I was like, they are. And I couldn't remember my specific rheumatologist I'd been given, but I could remember the name of the person in charge of like that whole unit, so I was saying her name. So then they were like ringing around. They rang the guy who put the midline in, and he was like, yeah, you can use it. You can use it. You do use them. They are like a cannula. The staff were really pushy about me getting myself ready for this MRI that they hadn't even actually confirmed with me that I was still definitely getting. So I was just a bit like, please leave me alone. Also talking to me like I'd never had an MRI before, when I've had loads. I've said to them that I've had lots of MRIs. That's not an issue. The MRI is not the issue. The issue is my veins and cannulating me, getting access to put contrast in. That's why we've done this. Like, it just didn't matter what me or my mum said, really. A lot of the time they were just sort of talking over us and not really interested in interrupting things we would say. So yeah, they did eventually okay it. So my mum was filling in the form on my behalf. She doesn't know my weight, so she missed that bit out, and one of the other staff members was like, okay, come get weighed. And I was like, no, I can tell you my weight. So I told her what the weight was, and it's just like, you know, you've just seen me have a absolutely humongous breakdown. How many people actually are fine or neutral or okay or happy with the idea of being weighed? Like, I don't know, maybe just mention it, like, hey, you didn't fill this in, do you know what this is first? You know, like, it just seemed like there was no care for me from most of the staff there, and it was almost like they thought I had like a breakdown on purpose. Yeah, they'd been really pushy about me removing my watch and all that sort of thing, and I was like, yes, I'll do that in a minute. Like, I know what to remove. I just don't want to do all that if you're not going to do the scan. So when they said that they would do it, I took my watch off. That was easy, but this can be quite hard to do, especially without a mirror. So I was there with my phone trying to use the camera app to like find the like hinge part, and I just really felt the energy of this person like exasperated at me for taking longer to try and find the thing. It's like, well, do you want me to remove my fucking nose ring for inside an MRI or not? And I was prepared for this next bit because this happens at lots of MRI units generally, that, you know, they'll put you in a gown because most people who have MRIs are just like a one-off MRI visitor. You know, it's not that common to have someone who has been to a million MRIs. So I was basically dressed for an MRI, so I didn't need to take off my clothes because it's fucking cold in MRI machines anyway, but it's also just cold that day. The only thing I had to change was changing my trackies, because I was wearing trackies that are a bit more suitable for like being out and about in, but I did bring my MRI trackies. So I said to them, I was like, all I need to do is change into these trackies, so I would rather not wear a gown or like change out of all my clothes into a gown. And they were like, oh, so do you have a bra on? I was like, yeah, but no underwire. There's no metal on anything else that I'll be wearing in there. This is often what I wear for an MRI. So they were like, okay, fine. They put me in the changing room to change my trousers. And then they knocked on the door and I was like, yeah. But no one opened the door, and I realised there was no handle. There was no handle on the door. There was no handle, there was no lock that I could control. So understandably, I was a bit panicked and confused. So I was looking around like, how do I get out of here? I then saw that on the other side of me was a door that had a handle and a lock on my side, so I pushed it to see if it was locked or anything. And I found myself in the waiting room. And I sort of came out, and I saw my mum, and there were a few other people sitting there too. And I was like, they've just locked me in there. Then they opened the door, and I was like, yeah, I couldn't open the door to answer you. And then they were like, here's a gown, please put this gown on over everything. I was like, why do I need to put a gown on over everything I'm already wearing? And they never answered the question. They just kept telling me to put the gown on. I was like, why do I need to put the gown on? Hello, autism. Autism has entered the chat. Yeah, she just rolled her eyes at me and just put the gown down in the changing room and brought me through to the MRI unit itself. They laid me down on the thing. They didn't give me inner ear earplugs, and I was a bit like concerned and confused about that, but I thought maybe the headphones are fine, we'll see. So I had the overhead headphones. Half of the thing was broken. Like, they put a lot of these, I don't know if they're really called cages, but like that's what they kind of look and feel like, to keep you still / in place. And yeah, they didn't buckle. A lot of them didn't buckle, so I was a bit like, great, if I move slightly, is this just going to go flying across the room? Then the man, who I think they called the consultant, I don't really know, came in to, he said clean the midline, which I don't think he cleaned it. He just flushed saline. He was like, I know you've just had this done, but we have to do it. And like, that's not a problem. I understand that. Like, I understand that from one team to another, you still have to check and make sure that the cannula or the midline or whatever it is actually working so that you can put contrast in later. Like, I understand that. That is not a problem. It's just weird that he was calling it cleaning it, because I was expecting him to get out some like alcohol wipes or something. No, it was just flushing the midline. When he was flushing the midline as well, the way he was talking about it as if he was surprised it was working. Like, he was like, well, it works. And it's like, yeah, why wouldn't it be working? I just had it put in by the guy whose job is to put these things in. Like, you know, it was just the attitudes of everybody there, both towards me and towards the different people who are part of the process of me getting there, was just really disrespectful to everybody involved. And yeah, like, as they were strapping me in, that woman again, who I liked the least out of everyone there, was just kind of talking to me as if had never had an MRI, and it's the MRI that I was anxious about. And I'm pretty sure I said a few times, like, I know, I've had an MRI, it's fine, like, whatever. The midline was fine, no problems. They put me in for the first lot of scanning. And then, yeah, it was time to start scanning, and it was really fucking loud. It was too loud. And obviously I already had like a really heightened nervous system anyway. I've got a heightened heightened nervous system anyway at the moment, as I've been saying constantly for months. Just always feel activated. But like, it was worse because obviously I've just had a massive breakdown and was being repeatedly kind of, I don't know, antagonized by these different staff members in one way or another. So I was like, yeah, I will not be able to sit here for the whole scan with this noise. So when the first sort of round of those noises were done, I pushed that button that they give you. I have only ever pushed that button once before for other MRIs, and that was because my cannula for a small bowel MRI was hurting, and that's when they were flushing it to make sure that it was still in the right place and stuff, and it was. I've never used that button for an MRI before because I don't have issues doing MRIs. It was also an especially small MRI. It was definitely a lot more narrow and claustrophobic than the average MRI machine is. Luckily, I'm not claustrophobic and don't have that kind of worry with MRIs because that would have probably made it worse. So yeah, I pressed that button and they let me out and like asked if I was okay, and I was like, it's really loud. And it was the man who said this. Yes, it is loud. And like, I don't know, just the way a lot of the people speaking to me were really condescending. And it's like, I am 30 this year. I know I have the face of a child, and I know I just had a big breakdown in your waiting room, but I am an adult, but you are speaking to me like I have no capacity. And I was like, yeah, do you have any of the inner earbuds? And they weren't even sure. So I was like, look, I have always been given these inner ear earbuds and the overhead headphones for MRIs. I've never had an MRI without them in. So like they were fanning about trying to find some. So it's clearly not in their practice there to offer them. Whereas like it is always offered at my local one and was always offered at any other one I've had elsewhere. I've never not been offered them. And then my favourite lady came back with them because I was obviously under all these cages. So she came along with the earbuds and like really quite aggressively tried to ram one in my left ear. And for one, it missed my ear canal entirely. So I moved my left hand up to put it in place. And she was like, they expand. I was like, yeah, but they're not in. It's not in my ear. So then I put the other one in myself. They put the headphones back on my head. And then I went back in and it was much better sound-wise again. And it was really difficult anyway because obviously the whole time I was just like upset and tears were like leaking out of my face. It was horrible. Then I realised the issue now was that them speaking over the like speaker thing from behind their glass pane doesn't go into the headphones. It just goes out into the room. So my local MRI unit, they put the big headphones over your ears. That's where they speak into. It's either in there or like somewhere in the actual tube you're in the MRI machine, so you can hear what they're saying to you with lots of like ear protection on. And they were like, did you hear us? And I was like, no. I was like, I can't hear you. So they said it again and they were like, did you hear that? I was like, all I heard was contrast. So yeah, okay. They were just telling me that it was time for the contrast. So it's just like, cool, yes, do the contrast please. Don't know how they managed to do the contrast because I don't really feel like I was out of the machine. I think they did, I don't know. So then it was done not long after that anyway. They didn't pass me my glasses, I had to go get them myself, and they sat me in another random chair that was facing the door that goes to the waiting room, and then just sort of round the corner with no doors or any kind of separating anything between where I was sat and the cannulation chair. There was a patient sat in there who was also a young person with difficult veins. I could hear her talking about it, and I could then hear her being attempted the person I didn't like, the staff member I didn't like, was attempting to cannulate her and was not successful several times. And I could just hear this poor woman getting upset and being in pain, and that was then actually really triggering me with my my trauma around cannulation and people not listening to me about cannulation, and hearing somebody else kind of just going through that I've been through, what like just set me off again pretty much. So I sort of got up. This part is really blurry as well in my memory because the panic was rising in my body and brain. So yeah, I sort of got up and was like, I need to go. So I went to try and get out through that door to the waiting room. And again, there was no handle. I couldn't get out. The member of staff who rolled her eyes at me earlier came over and I was like, I have to get out, I can't be in here. And she was going like, oh, what about the midline? What about your midline? Because they were supposed to remove the midline. And I was like, I don't care, I need to get out of here. So opened the door and I sort of went straight into my mum's arms, sobbing. There were a few more patients now waiting in the waiting room, and I was saying to my mum, I was like, there's a girl in there who's got tricky veins too, and I could just hear her as they were trying to access her and not being able to access her, and it just set me off. So my mum went and got my stuff, and I sort of just sat where she was sat for now. The lady next to me was asking if I was okay, and I was like, yeah, I'm just like not good with needles and cannulation. My veins are tricky. Like I could barely get words out, to be honest. Like I was like hiccup sobbing, and I was like, and everyone here has just been so horrible to me. So yeah, my mum got everything I needed. One of the other patients waiting got me some tissues and she gave them to me, and I think her and the man next to her were saying some nice things to me, but I just could not process them at all. And her giving me the tissues made me cry even more, because yeah, just the niceness of those people as well just made me feel better. My therapist said when I told her about this the next day, she was like, you know, the way that the patients just weren't even shocked, it's almost like that's just how it is there. And I was like, wow, I hadn't thought about that actually, but yeah, very possibly that these people have been here before and this is what they see. So yeah, we then walked back to the renal building. They did say before we left earlier that if MRI were being funny about removing it, then we could come back. So we decided we'd just go back there to get it removed. And it was the nurse that I sort of had a little bit of conflict with who was the one to remove it, but she was very lovely. I think it was just some miscommunication of that previous part. We had to wait a while because she was on her break, but we were like, that is literally fine. We need some time to like wind down from all of that that's just happened. Yeah, I laid on the bed, put my phone on charge as well because we'd been out all day, so I think it was getting low on battery. I wanted to have it charged for the rest of like the journey back home. Just sort of laid in the bed trying to like calm down a bit, drink some water. After the midline was removed, my mum was like, I don't know how they were supposed to do it in MRI anyway because of how small that area is and how impersonal that area is, but also then like how difficult it would have been to keep all of this stuff sterilized, because I basically needed to lay down again for it. She had to remove all of the adhesives that was keeping it in place first, then sort of prepare me for removing the entire catheter part, which was, it was all fine. Honestly, again, the worst bit of the removal part was literally removing all of the adhesives. It was so painful. Everything else was fine. Yeah, again, it was back in the same place. It was the same bed I'd been in earlier. Nobody was in this room. It was very quiet, and yeah, it was just a better environment to do that sort of thing in. She also was very careful and cautious with me because I was not staying in hospital. So yeah, after she removed the midline and the catheter attached to it, she held some gauze on there for I think 5 minutes. She held pressure on the access point to make sure that I wasn't bleeding. Like, I don't know how they would have done that down in MRI, especially when they still had people coming through for scans. She also said, like, once she put the final sort of dressing on, she said, like, wait and rest for 5 minutes, see how you feel, drink some water, then try to sit up for a bit, then in like 10 minutes try and walk around. I'll come back and I'll have a look and make sure that you're not bleeding and be okay for you to go home, you know. And she was like, I'm sorry for making you wait longer, but we just want to make sure. And we were like, no, that's completely fine. We would rather you tell us to take time here and us stay longer here to make sure this was all done correctly and safely for me. So yeah, once that was all done and everything was okay, we went home. But unfortunately, because like we did a lot of public transport, did buses and the trains and stuff, any pressure of like my arm pressing against my body was really painful. The only thing as well, like with the actual midline in, it was fine, except I could start feeling some pressure here, and I think that was just sort of from where the midline had been inserted. So that was the more uncomfortable part about the midline as all of the anaesthetic and my diazepam had worn off. But yeah, any kind of like squashing it to my body was really painful, so we had to sort of try and like work out how to like sit next to each other on public transport, so that it wouldn't hurt, or it wouldn't get like pushed or knocked and stuff. So yeah, like the midline itself really was not as big of a deal as I thought it was. Obviously I was very anxious getting it done because I had no real understanding or expectations of what it was like or what it would be like for me personally. It was also a little bit validating that even they were struggling to access a vein, because I get to use that as a trump card now to be like, well, I had a midline put in and they use ultrasound to find the veins, and even they found it difficult. Thank you very much. So stop being a bitch to me, thanks. But yeah, unfortunately, my whole experience within the MRI unit was horrific. On my way home, I just wanted to close my eyes because obviously I'd been so frazzled from everything. I was finding the overhead lighting everywhere really difficult, but every time I closed my eyes, I was kind of back in those moments. So yeah, I feel like I've definitely been re-triggered and re-traumatized in things I was already traumatized about, but also like additional trauma around other things now. You know, not experienced doors not having handles before, or literally being basically in the exact same room as somebody else getting a cannula put in and having loads of problems. Like, I've been in the same room as other people getting bloods done. I've been in the same room but separated by curtains by other things, but never so unseparated that this was, but also never had to experience somebody else having like the same kind of difficulties I've been through, especially with members of staff that I didn't feel treated me very nicely. So yeah, from here on, I haven't really fully addressed this with my team yet because unfortunately I had some shitty blood test results and some other issues with health stuff, that has now sort of left us in a bit of a weird place right now with some of my medications and what we're going to do next. We may possibly change my mercaptopurine to azathioprine so that both of my rheumatology teams have more of an understanding of how to prescribe it, because that's a medication they use more often. That's a whole other debacle and issue that I am thinking about making a complaint about. But basically, I think from here onwards, if they want me to have this scan every year, they're going to have to get it sorted from my local hospital, because the MRI team there, all of the people who work either as healthcare assistants or radiologists and stuff, they've always been kind to me. They've always been respectful towards me. They've always been really upset on my behalf when I've been told the wrong information about things to do with their service, as well as been upset and understanding and empathetic or sympathetic, I still forget which is which, towards me when I do have high panic levels around the cannulation stuff, because they've not always been successful and it hasn't always been easy with them either, but at least they've always been kind to me. And now I've had some conversations with people in different departments to hopefully make that process generally easier for future MRIs with contrast. And like I said, that's where I did my last one of these scans. They have just always been much kinder to me, and I think as well, like, all of that journey does not help in those kinds of situations, because I think we had like basically 2 hours of travel there and back on public transport, whereas like at least in my local hospital it's just like someone can drive me and either park or drop me off, and it's like familiar and it's not too far away from home. It wouldn't take an entire day to do all of that stuff like it did for this. Yeah, whilst I appreciated they were attempting to help with the vein issues that I have by doing a midline, unfortunately it has been a really bad experience overall. So I think it'll be something, yeah, that I discuss with both rheumatology teams, because I don't feel safe and comfortable doing all that again to end up with a really dismissive and just generally unkind, unsympathetic MRI team. And yeah, I'm a little bit 50-50 on making a complaint about this as well, because Obviously I didn't take anyone's names because I was in an absolute fucking state. But I mean, I can say the date and time. They should be able to come up with the list of everyone who was working there at the time. And I can say everyone but the agency person was horrible to me. And I mean, I've written up most of it already to a friend of mine right after it happened, because I just was struggling to process everything that happened there. But yeah, I don't know quite what I plan to do with that yet. I would like to make a complaint about it, because I think that the way I was treated by different members of staff was not good, but especially that one member of staff. Like, there were so many ways they could have handled this better. For one, they shouldn't have been saying a lot of those things directly to me, especially before speaking to other people. They should have been asking me for more information, like who the doctor was that did set all this up, what team maybe that was, spoken to the midline person before telling me they can't do it. You know, there's so many things they could have done to avoid causing me all that distress, and then the other things that happened wouldn't have been as distressing as they were. And as well, like, this is why, again, is a key example of like why I make these videos, is because like if I hadn't had all of my past experiences, good and bad, in healthcare, then I wouldn't have known how to advocate for myself in that situation. I very easily could have let them attempt to cannulate me several times and still not succeeded to do it, and put myself through that I shouldn't have to be put through because I'd had a midline put in. I probably wouldn't have known to ask for the in-ear earbuds if I had never had an MRI before. You know, there are lots of things that if I hadn't been through those experiences before, I wouldn't have known how to advocate for my needs in that situation. You know, it definitely could have been a lot worse if I hadn't had past experiences that taught me otherwise. And that's why I'm here making these videos, is that I want people to know that they don't always have to do what people are suggesting they do, because a lot of the times they're only suggesting it because they are too lazy to do the investigating. They're too lazy to get information from you and from your teams, or from anybody who's treated you that day for this. And they are very judgmental. They don't think that what you're telling them is true. And that's why I've had a lot of issues with vein access for bloods and cannulation, because a lot of people have not listened to me when I've said my veins are not easy to access. I need somebody who is very experienced generally, but also experienced in accessing difficult veins for this purpose. Most people don't listen to me, and they really should. That's a really basic thing. They say, oh yeah, I can do that, and then they can't. They can't, and then I find out that they're not as experienced as they were, because they're like, oh, there's somebody above me who could do this, who's better at this than me. And it's like, well, why didn't you bring them in? I told you to bring them in. Bring in the best person you have. And like a lot of these issues as well, if these medical staff just listened to what the patient said first before acting or making assumptions, then a lot of time would be saved, a lot of stress would be saved for everyone, and probably as well a lot of medical resources would also be saved, because the amount of times that things have not gone well because someone couldn't do something properly the first time round, that means those things have been wasted because they couldn't use them for me because they didn't listen to what I said initially. Yeah, this is a long video, and I'm actually surprised I haven't cried. I am actually really surprised about that. I think I'm still kind of detached and dissociated from it, partly because I was sort of detached and dissociated from parts of it because of being on diazepam, but also because of those really extreme panic moments that I went through that just, you just can't, you just weren't there. And like, I wasn't there. So yeah, I feel a little bit emotional now at the end, but yeah, I just don't think it's been fully processed yet. I did a lot of crying that day and that night, but I do think I'm sort of falling back on one of my go-to, can't even think of the coping strategies. I've been told in therapy before that I have a very performative way of talking about my problems, and that maybe that's because I have detached the feeling from it. I think it's because if I don't detach the feeling from it sometimes, I will never be able to tell the story. I will never be able to explain what happened to somebody. And honestly, sometimes the fact that people are there making jokes and performing their traumatic stories is maybe a really big sign that they need support and that they have been really badly affected by this, because they can't even access the emotion they feel, or the emotions they feel, because it's probably more than one emotion. But yeah, so that was my recent update of what I've been through medically. That was not good. I do have some other positive things I want to share in another video, so hopefully I'll get to that when I can. This video is so long, my throat kind of hurts from speaking so much. But yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Share my videos if you think they'll help somebody, or if they are interested in the topics I talk about. Yeah, you don't have to go through things that bad. You don't have to be treated this badly by staff. And I really think things need to be changing in the NHS generally. I know that they're under a lot of stress in a lot of ways, but so are we as patients. And their number one is meant to be centering the patient, centering their needs, centering their care over everything else. So it may not always be convenient for them, but they really should be focusing on that over anything else. So that's it for this week, and I will see you next week. Bye.